Hello everyone and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IES. So disaster management. It is a subject that you might have read in school and UPSC also recognizes the importance of this subject by including it as a part of the GS3 paper. So, disaster management, what exactly it is, and what all will be included in this disaster management module of your UPSC study, we'll try to take a look at that in the upcoming slides. So, disaster management is basically understanding the disaster and drawing up a proper response against any kind of such disaster in order to reduce the amount of destruction that is caused by the particular disaster. So, in the disaster management module of UPSC, we will be covering the various ways in which the particular disasters they can be addressed and what are the various policies, guidelines and plans both at the international level and the national level that we have undertaken in order to provide a better response towards these disasters. So, what is the course outline? How will the whole module go forward? We'll just take a look at that. First, we'll study about the basics and the introduction to what is disaster, to what are various hazards, what is the difference between a hazard and a disaster, and what is a disaster management cycle. So, in the first module, we'll study about that. Next, we'll come to classification of disasters, where we'll read about the various types of disasters like the geological ones, the hydrological disasters, meteorological, climatological, and in the end, the anthropogenic and the biological disasters. We'll study about what they are, how are they caused, their impacts, the vulnerability that India faces when it comes to any of these disasters, how can the risks related to them can be managed, and what is the way forward? What other steps do we need to take to reduce the impacts of these disasters? After this, we'll come to an interesting module that is UN and disaster management. What are the various frameworks? How historically there has been an evolution towards the response that we give to the disaster, and what are the various frameworks that have been developed at an international level to reduce our exposure, to reduce our losses due to any disasters. Next, we'll come to the disaster management in India, a historical perspective on how our response towards disasters has evolved. After this, we'll study about the various legislations, various policies and guidelines that have been put into place by the government of a country so that we can give a proper response to any disaster in order to reduce our exposure to that. Now, under classification of disasters, what all disasters will be covered by us? We'll study about earthquakes. When we talk about disasters, the earthquake is one disaster that comes very readily to our minds. So, we'll study about earthquakes, how are they caused, what are their impacts, what are the various places internationally and with respect to India that are susceptible to earthquakes, and how can the damage due to earthquakes be prevented. Then, in a similar manner, we'll also study about avalanches and landslides, volcanoes, tsunamis that are mainly caused due to either of these three. Then we'll study about tropical cyclones, which are very important for India. Then floods, again a very important disaster when it comes to India, because almost every year one or the other place gets flooded. Then we'll talk about the heat waves and cold waves and how they are being exacerbated by climate change. We'll study about the phenomena of cloudburst. A question was directly asked about cloudburst in the year 2022. After this, we'll take a look at forest fires, at droughts, at flash droughts, and epidemics and pandemics. This is very much in news due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And all these three disasters, they are also continuously in news because of climate change and how climate change will increase the frequency and the randomness of these disasters. After this, we'll be covering the various man-made disasters like industrial disasters, like the CBRN disasters, that is chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear disasters, and finally the stampedes. So what has been the trend when it comes to UPSC asking questions about disaster management? Over the years, at least one or a maximum of two questions they have been asked directly from disaster management module, ranging from 10 to 25 marks. So we can either have a 10 marker, a 15 marker, or both a 10 and a 15 marker. So up to 10 to 25 marks of questions they have been asked by UPSC. In 2013, there was just one question that was for 10 marks. Then 2014, we had two questions of 12.5 plus 12.5 marks each, that is 25 marks. Then 2015, 16, 2017, 18, these 4 years had just one question each. 2019, finally, there were two questions. Again, in the past 2 years, we have seen that at least two questions have been asked from disaster management, one each 10 marker and 15 marker. So almost 25 marks, that is 10% of the total mark, have been given to the disaster management questions. Let us now take a look at sample PYQs or the previous year questions from each module, that is from basics, classification of disasters, UN and disaster management, and Indian disaster management framework. We'll be discussing these questions in our sessions as well, so I won't go into much detail. We just want to take an idea of what kind of questions can come from each module so that we can focus upon that particular aspect when it comes to that particular module. In the basics, the questions were like, how important is vulnerability and risk assessment for pre-disaster management? And as an administrator, because you are giving this exam to become an administrator, what are the key areas that you would focus upon in a disaster management system? So this question was for 10 marks and 150 words. Another question was, vulnerability is an essential element for defining disaster impacts and its threat to people. How and in what ways can vulnerability to disasters be characterized? And discuss different types of vulnerabilities with reference to disasters. So this question also came for 10 marks in 2019. So we know that vulnerability as a concept is very important when we talk about disaster management, and you should also know about the disaster management framework or the disaster management cycle when you are acting as an administrator for any particular place. Then with regards to classification of disasters, In 2022, we had a question for 10 marks on cloudbursts, susceptibility of India towards cloudburst, with us requiring to cite two examples in the paper. In 2021, there was a question of landslide and the important components under National Landslide Risk Management Strategy. In 2015, we had a 150-word question on frequency of earthquakes, how it has increased in Indian subcontinent, and how is India prepared to mitigate the impact, and what are the significant gaps when it comes to India's preparedness. In 2017, there was again a question on tsunamis. December 2004, a tsunami brought havoc on 14 countries, including India. Discuss the factors responsible for occurrence of tsunamis, its impact on life and economy, and in light of guidelines of NDMA, describe the mechanisms for preparedness to reduce the risk during any such events. So we can see that in the module regarding classification of disaster, there have been varied type of questions ranging from causes of the disaster, the impact of the disaster, India's vulnerability, and various incidents or various examples of any such disaster striking India, and what all guidelines have been adopted by India to reduce the risk towards these disasters. So we need to cover all these aspects when it comes to classification of disasters. Next, we come to United Nations and disaster management. So there have been questions related to the various frameworks that have been adopted by the United Nations, ranging from Yokohama in 1994 to Sendai framework in 2015. So we need to focus at the various principles that have been given under these frameworks. And apart from that, we also need to focus upon the other programs that have been undertaken by the United Nations to address the issue of disaster management, like something called UN Spider. We'll study about all these in the module on UN and disaster management. Then we come to India's disaster management infrastructure. The question was asked in 2020 for 15 marks. Discuss the recent measures initiated in disaster management by Government of India, departing from the earlier reactive approach. So here it becomes essential that we know about the historical evolution of disaster management approaches over the time and how they have changed and in response to what events have they changed. So all this will also be covered under the session on India's disaster management infrastructure. So this is all about the previous year questions. Now let us move on to how do we approach to disaster management as a subject. Now this module is a very small one. You don't have to spend a lot of time in trying to understand disaster management because it is a very straightforward subject. You know about the various disasters and you know about the ways to address those disasters. Most of that will be covered in geography. Many of the geographical disasters like earthquakes, like volcanoes, landslides, like even cyclones, forest fires, they will be mostly covered in geography. What are their causes? So this will be just like a revisionary activity for you. Next, so we have seen in the trends that you can get up to 25 marks of questions from this module. Now, because this module is very straightforward and simple to understand and write about, it becomes very important so that you can get those 25 marks very easily. The questions that will be asked will be very much related to the current events. what current events have taken place with regards to disaster management, and you can focus on those particular events, those particular disasters, to get very easy 10 to 25 marks. So to prepare yourself, you can go through the lectures that will be given to you by me, and you can take a look at the current events that are going around, and you can then focus on those particular lectures. So what all books and magazines would we recommend to you when it comes to disaster management? First is Internal Security of India and Disaster Management book that will be provided to you, that will have the framework of the various disasters and how the country will respond to those disasters. Then the chapter on natural hazards and disasters, that is chapter 7 of the class 11 NCERT, India Physical Environment. You will need to take a brief read of this chapter so as to have a better understanding of what we'll cover in the upcoming lectures. I will also suggest you to go through Yojana 2017 January edition that talked about handling the disaster challenges in the country. So you can take a look at this to have a more deeper understanding of disaster management practices in the country. Then the third report of the second ARC on crisis management, you can also take a look at it in your leisure time. And finally, there is an ebook that is published by the Ministry of Home Affairs on disaster management in India. If you have time, then you can take a look at this book as well. However, if you have less amount of time, I would suggest you to go through the lectures, go through this book, this chapter, and the Yojana. So this will suffice when it comes to your UPSC preparation for disaster management. So let us now move forward towards studying the various modules, and we'll also be discussing the various previous year questions and how can you approach to those questions so as to fetch as many marks as possible.